This is the Coros Pace Pro with a large 1.3-inch AMOLED touchscreen display, faster processor, mapping, and all for a very reasonable $349. So I've been wondering if Coros would ever make an AMOLED screen watch because, as we know, Coros has always been known for having massive battery life on their watches. And as we also know, AMOLED screens aren't super friendly on our old buddies, the little tiny lithium-ion batteries that are built into these watches. In this, it isn't exactly a tiny little AMOLED display. The Pace 3, for reference, is a 1.2-inch screen, and this Pace Pro is a very bright, vibrant 1.3-inch color touchscreen display. How bright? Well, its peak brightness is 1500 nits, so it's plenty visible in direct sunlight conditions. Just for reference, most of the AMOLED watches that I test here on this channel, they max out at about 1000 nits of brightness. The Apple Watch Series 10 is 2000 nits, and the Apple Watch Ultra 2 is 3000 nits. Now, I've only been using this watch for about 10 days now, so I can't really speak to durability of this watch in this particular video, but the watch lens itself is a reinforced mineral glass. So it's not Gorilla Glass, but it's something similar. Now, my recommendations, and one of the first things that I'm gonna do personally with this watch is put on a 1.3-inch screen protector. These were about $6 on Amazon, and I'll link them below, of course. So on to the biggest question that you probably have about this device. How does this large, bright, new screen affect battery life? Well, as with any AMOLED display watch, it is a significant hit here. Now, this is a bigger watch, so it does have space for a bigger battery. Compared to the Pace 3, this watch is 46 millimeters in diameter, whereas the Pace 3 was about 42 millimeters. It's actually also thicker. It's thicker on the wrist. It's about 14 millimeters, kind of like raised off your wrist, as opposed to the very, very slim 12 millimeters of the Pace 3. But that space, it actually allows for a 345 milliamp battery, whereas the Pace 3 was something like 236 milliamp. Now, I've actually been seeing decent battery life for an AMOLED watch from this watch so far. Now, I like to set these watches up with the always on display mode on, meaning the display is always on, and I'm seeing about 5 or 6 days of battery life so far, but you can also set this battery life to a raise to wake mode, and Coros is saying that you can expect up to about 20 days of battery life in that mode. And again, just for reference, the Pace 3 for me was typically going about 2 weeks, using about an hour or maybe a little less than an hour of outdoor GPS activity with the watch each day. Now, comparing it to just a few other AMOLED devices on the market, it does pretty well. In a lot of cases, bigger watches with bigger batteries are just gonna do better. But there's actually a few ways to look at battery life. There's this everyday use kind of scenario, and then there's how long it can perform GPS activities, which is actually pretty important, especially for the type of people who tend to wear Coros watches. And interestingly, this Pace Pro doesn't have a standard GPS mode. You'll be picking between the all systems mode and the dual frequency mode here. And check this out. This is actually super crazy. Even with the AMOLED screen, the Pace Pro is actually getting better GPS battery life than the Pace 3. So using the default all systems mode, you can expect about 13 hours more than using the same mode on the Pace 3. And then using the more accurate dual frequency mode, you might see something like 10 more additional hours compared to that Pace 3. Okay, if you are buying the Pace Pro for $350, you'll have 3 color choices to choose from. The watch comes in black, blue, and gray. Throughout this video, you're gonna see me using the blue edition of this watch, and I like it pretty well. When you get the watch home, in the box, you'll see the watch itself, of course. There's this little card with Jakob Ingebrigtsen's photo on it. On the back of it, it's got details about their free 10K, half marathon, and marathon training programs. There's also this very interesting keychain charger here. And then you'll also get a user's guide, a quick start guide, and just some stickers here. Now, interestingly, there is no USB-C charging cable here. The keychain is very cool, but it's like a BYO USB-C kind of situation. Actually, Coros said that they would send you one if you actually asked for one, but they figured that most of us would already have an extra USB-C cord lying around, and as for me, they're absolutely correct there. But this keychain charging adapter is actually pretty cool. I actually have one of these for my Garmin watches, and it does come in handy when you need to charge up and you just need to be able to find your keys to do it. But one of the first things I did was start trying it on other older Coros watches. And surprisingly, because it does kind of look like it should work, it doesn't. The new charging port design isn't backwards compatible with older Coros cords, and then this little charging adapter piece will only work with the Pace Pro at this time. But either way, I do think that there's a chance that you'll either lose this little tiny adapter piece, or you might want a few additional chargers just around your house. Coros is gonna be charging $20 for these. Now, when you do check out, there are a couple of add-ons that you can purchase when purchasing your Pace Pro. Coros has 3 new nylon watch bands that roughly match up to the 3 color choices that you have for this watch. Those nylon watch bands cost $30 each. And I describe these as kind of having a little bit of a digital camo style look to them. Technically, you could switch these watch bands out with any 22mm quick fit compatible watch bands. So you can probably find more affordable options if you do want to look at someplace like Amazon. Now, if you are familiar with Coros, a lot of this is not going to be a surprise to you, but the Pace Pro has a scroll wheel, or Coros actually calls it their digital dial, for navigating through the watch operating system and making selections. And then you can also, if you're within an activity, you can switch screens within that activity, and you can just see more training metrics or more details about something. You could see a map screen, for example. But that scroll wheel is actually now stainless steel as opposed to plastic, which is definitely nice. But also on this side of the watch, you'll actually notice that there's a back button here, and it's significantly larger. It's about 26% bigger than the Pace 3 back button. And you can hold that back button to pull up the quick menu. Again, I think Coros calls it their toolbox area. From there, you can do stuff like find your phone, set an alarm, use a stopwatch, go into the settings menu, and you can do a lot more from this little toolbox area. But mostly, I actually think of that button as kind of the back button throughout the operating system, and the scroll wheel is more used for navigating and selecting things. The watch body itself is plastic, similar to the Pace 3, I suppose, and while it is still pretty lightweight, it is going to be heavier than the Pace 3. Weighing these with different types of watch bands is definitely not like a fair comparison. The nylon watch band really subtracts a massive amount of weight on these watches. But weighing just the watch bodies themselves, I'm seeing about 32 grams versus 26 grams of the Pace 3. So if you are one of those frustrated buyers that just purchased the Pace 3, just be happy that you've got a more affordable and a lighter weight device that is still 100% functional. But the Pace Pro is also significantly faster. How much faster? The internal changes to RAM and the new processor make it about twice as fast as the Pace 3. If we're looking at DMIPS as far as processor speeds go, the Pace 3 running at 1.25 DMIPS at 150 megahertz will give us about 187.5 as a score, versus the Pace Pro running at 1.6 DMIPS at 250 megahertz will give you a score of about 400. So a little bit more than twice the speed of the Pace 3. But the Pace Pro also has 3 times more powerful RAM when compared to the Pace 3. So adding all of this up, it does add up to a significantly faster device. And we might notice that when we're just scrolling and moving through the operating system. But the Pace Pro also has faster uploads and faster download speeds. And then another place you might notice this is just the speed increase when you're zooming in and out on maps. The Pace Pro is roughly 3 times faster compared to watches like the Apex 2 or the Apex 2 Pro. And yes, you heard me correctly. The Pace Pro has offline global mapping. The Pace Pro has more storage space as well to handle those maps. Or I guess you could handle more MP3s or whatever else you really want to put on this watch. But it has 32 gigs of storage as opposed to the 4 gigs of storage that the Pace 3 had. Now, I will say that maps on AMOLED watches are really nice. You're typically working with about twice the screen resolution, so you end up with a ton more detail within maps. Now, I will say that Coros maps don't have the same level of detail regarding street names, trail names, or points of interest, or things like that you might see on a watch coming from somewhere like Garmin. But Coros also mentioned that they are going to continue to work on the mapping section within all of their watches. So, we'll just watch this space and kind of see where things go. Now, real quickly, I do want to look at GPS accuracy. To me, I don't see any major issues here. I'm comparing the Garmin Enduro and the all-new Black Edition of Apple Watch Ultra 2, both of which have this dual frequency GPS. And I'm comparing it, of course, to this Polar Pace Pro, which also has dual GPS. And I do have it set in that most accurate dual frequency GPS mode. But by default, the Pace Pro will be set in a more battery-friendly all systems mode. That's probably the mode that I would actually leave it in, unless you're really worried about GPS accuracy. Personally, I don't stress too much about that, couple of tiny discrepancies in GPS tracks, but it could also mean that, it might affect your pacing information, which is definitely something that Coros has struggled with in the past. Now, if we do flip this watch over on its back, this is actually the same heart rate sensor that's on the Apex 2, the Apex 2 Pro, the Vertex 2S, and the Pace 3. What's new here is this little metallic ring around the sensor. So if you're like me, you're thinking, ooh, this is amazing. This Pace Pro with its stainless steel dial could potentially perform an ECG, right? Well, not exactly. You see, Coros is saying that it has the hardware to perform ECG-like readings that will definitely help increase accuracy. And in particular, it'll increase accuracy with their HRV readings, but it's not currently looking to get the medical regulatory approval to actually perform ECGs on this device. And if you're not familiar with HRV, that's heart rate variability. You can kind of think of it as the amount of time between heartbeats. And typically, when you're really worn out from some sort of crazy hard workouts, or more likely in my case, like a night of heavy drinking, your heart rate is beating much more steady, much more regularly, because it's trying to recover. Whereas when you're feeling fresh as a daisy, your heart might be more erratic, and it might show a slightly higher HRV score, indicating, yup, your body is definitely ready to go. It's definitely ready to do a workout. Now, there's actually a new swimming update in here that I don't think anyone is really talking about, but it's something that I'm actually really excited about. You see, you can now more accurately measure drill sets and kick sets within the lap swimming activity of this watch. Drills and kick sets are something that, I think, all of us should be doing pretty much every time that we hit the water. But it used to be that Coros would then mix up the actual distance that you've swam because it didn't have any way to accurately record these kick sets or drill sets. So if you were to do like a 200-meter kick set, your total would just be off by that amount. Or even worse, let's say you're doing some sort of drill, like some sort of like one-armed drill, your Coros would register half of those distances, the half that had the arm with the watch on it performing the drill, and then if you did the drill with the opposite arm, it would just record nothing. And there are hundreds of different types of swim drills to really mix things up with your own swimming, but now you can actually pause your workout, scroll down here, switch to a drill mode, do your drill set or kick set, hit the split button and specify the amount of distance that you've swam or done within that drill. And then when you're ready, pause your workout again, switch back to swim mode and just hit that split button to go on with your normal swim. Now, I will say that I don't think that this is quite as efficient as the way that Garmin does the same thing, but it definitely works. And it's a huge difference because you're actually going to get accurately accounted for distances if you do a lot of lap swimming. Now, I've mostly been focusing on what's new with the Pace Pro when compared to the Pace 3 within this video, but I do want to quickly show you guys how this looks in comparison against a few other watches on the market that are at least around this $350 price point. But first, here are some of Coros's own lineup for these watches. So again, of course, the Pace 3 and the Apex 2, the Apex 2 Pro, and then here the Pace Pro. Coros does also make a much bigger Vertex 2S. Personally, I don't think that watch is really designed to be comparable to this Pace Pro. It's really designed to be like an ultra long distance racing watch, like 100 to 200 mile races, which is absolutely crazy. Now, I don't actually think that you're gonna wanna consider the Polar Pacer Pro at this point, but I just thought it was interesting because of how similar the names are between these two watches. And I thought it would be funny to put these two watches next to each other. Pacer Pro, Pace Pro, Pacer Pro, Pace Pro. Anyway, moving on. Here's how it looks next to the Apple Watch Series 10. There's the 42mm edition and the 46mm edition. Remember, these watches will go for about a day or so before needing to be recharged, but they are actually a touch brighter at 2000 nits of peak brightness compared to this Pacer Pro at 1500 nits. And I'd argue that the Apple Watches are a little bit smarter watches in comparison as well, if you are already tied into that Apple iPhone ecosystem. Now on the Garmin side, I think the Garmin Forerunner 265 is probably the most comparable watch at $400 here. The 265 has breadcrumb navigation, so not true mapping like the Pacer Pro. But other than that, the 265 is a very complete watch, and it has a ton of features that Garmin does an excellent job on. Things like body battery, things like their morning report, which I like a lot. So it's another one to consider. Garmin also makes the Venue 3 and the Venue 3S, which costs around $450. And it's a pretty versatile watch, I would say. It has a speaker and a microphone, which definitely makes it a little bit smarter compared to like their Forerunner series of watches. And you're able to access that smartphone assistant. And then I will also say that Garmin makes a very similar watch, the Vivo Active 5, for $300. It's not a watch that I personally own. And then there's also the just now released Polar Vantage M3. Again, that's not a watch that I've reviewed yet, but it has a very similar feature set for $400. Comparing that M3 to the Polar Pacer Pro, I do think that some of these choices are going to come down to which feature set you prefer between these brands, which metrics and which data they're looking at. Speaking of which, Suunto makes a watch called the Suunto Race S, which is a fantastic watch and maybe even the most comparable watch within this group. It has mapping, it has dual band GPS, it has a similar size here, and it has, I'd say, a similar battery life, although, just in my early testing with the Pace Pro, I'd say that the Pace Pro tends to go a couple days longer than the Race S, but the price, exactly the same at $349. In fact, I'd say that these two watches are shockingly similar devices. So again, in my mind, picking between these two watches or these three watches is really gonna come down to three things. What brand you're most comfortable with, how do you like the looks of each of these watches, and which ecosystem, and by ecosystem I mean like which smartphone app, which training plans, which route building things do you like when you're using these watches. So with the Pace Pro, there is so much more that I'm not even touching on within this video. Coros can provide you with a custom marathon training program. You can track the miles on your shoes or the miles on your bike with this watch. You can dive pretty deep into sleep quality, and you can even track naps with this watch. There's even an update to their algorithm to be a little bit more sensitive and stable when it comes to pace changes when you're running. I know that's kind of like a hot spot or a hot topic that a lot of people are having issues with when they're talking about their Coros watches. Coros also has a virtual pacer feature to help you run even splits between your race or your workout or whatever you want to do. It also has a really cool smartphone extender feature where you can replicate your watch's metrics and see more detailed mapping information over on your smartphone. I actually like to use it when I'm cycling indoors just to give me a really large screen as opposed to looking at my wrist. But there's also safety alerts. There's a group tracking feature here, and that's kind of within a lot of the Coros watches, not specifically to the Pace Pro. So there's a ton of new stuff going on here from Coros. Overall, I've been super impressed with the Pace Pro over the past 10 days of testing it. It's a watch that I think will do extremely well. But as with any brand new product on the market, I do expect that we're gonna find bugs. I think we're gonna find issues that Coros will, of course, scramble and fix with software updates. I actually think that Coros does a pretty good job of updating their devices frequently. But overall, I do think this product is gonna be very popular for Coros. And I was wondering when Coros was going to make the move to AMOLED screens. And just a heads up for those of you guys who are completely freaking out about Coros switching from MIP style displays to AMOLED displays, Coros did mention that they are still planning on making MIP style displays as well. They're basically looking at their lineup to see where those displays are going to make the most sense and where people are potentially looking for the utmost amounts of battery life with their watches and where that display technology would fit in best. So if I were to wager a guess, a watch like the Vertex 2S, when they make a Vertex 3, for example, is most likely going to have a MIP style option pretty far into the future, just because that watch is literally designed for those mega long ultra marathon events. But what do you guys think? Are you concerned that Coros is making the switch to AMOLED screens? Is this something that you're excited about? For me, I'm really loving this Pace Pro. It could actually be a bit of an issue for Coros actually. With mapping, with faster processor here, with a nice bright screen, I actually much prefer this watch, this Pace Pro, compared to their Apex Pro or their Apex Pro 2, which costs $50 more. But let me know in the comment section what you think, and we can kind of continue the conversation down there. Comment section is just below the like button and the subscribe button down there. But either way, super bright Coros Pace Pro or no watch at all. I just hope that you guys are getting out there, swimming, biking, running, rinsing, and repeating it all over again. And we will see you guys in the next one.